ayes are 58, the nays 39. The motion is approved. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Defense, Deborah Lee James of Virginia to be Secretary of the Air Force.
Pursuant to the provisions of SRES 15 of the 113th Congress, there will now be up to 8 hours of post-cloture consideration of the nomination, equally divided in the usual form. If no one yields time, time will be equally charged.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
We're not in the quorum call. The senator is recognized.
Mr. President, we are definitely proceeding in an unusual manner at this point in time in the history of the United States Senate. We're moving under regular order. Nominations are being processed in regular order. Votes are being held. Debate is being shut off by the appropriate procedures. But it's unusual from what we've been doing all year and what we've been doing historically. So I guess the question is, how did we get to this point? What has happened in the Senate that's caused the difficulties we now have? And I believe it's becoming clear to our colleagues that actions that have been taking place in recent days have altered the very nature of the Senate, have eroded the collegiality that makes this body work on a daily basis, the kind of actions in which people unanimously agree to allow things to happen different from the regular order, that allow things to be proceeded up and go faster and move forward. And it's been done on a regular basis. But we've had a conflict and an alteration in the rules of the Senate that is so serious that it impacts the very nature of this institution and causing great concern. We've got a lot of new members to the Senate, and they haven't seen how the Senate operated just in the, 16, 17 years I've been here. And I've seen the great change, and it's a concern to me, and it's even different from that, more classical than that before I came here. And it's not healthy. It's not good. And it can't be allowed to just happen without any discussion, without any full understanding of how the majority leader of the United States Senate has accrued to himself power was never before allowed to be held by the majority leader of the Senate. It has altered the very nature of the debate here and the processes that involve our constitutional responsibility. So I believe we need to talk about it, and I believe we need to understand it, and somehow we need to alter what has happened. The United States Senate, Senator Robert Byrd, when I came, loved the Senate. Senator Robert Byrd said there are two great Senates, the Roman Senate and the U.S. Senate. And he gave us all, new members, a lecture about the great heritage of which we are a part. He wrote a book on the rules of the Senate. And we have rules for quite a number of years. Standing rule of the Senate is Rule 22. It's a clear, simple directive passed by 2/3 of the members of the Senate, duly chosen and sworn. This is what Rule 22 says. It's not confusing. It's very clear. It was adopted by 2/3 of the Senate. And it says this: a motion signed by 16 senators. That is, to initiate something, to shut off debate, you have to have 16 senators to file a motion. So a motion filed by 16 senators to bring to a close the debate upon any measure, motion, or other matter pending before the Senate. Any measure, motion, or other matter pending before the Senate includes nominations, shall be decided by 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn, except on a measure or motion to amend the Senate rules, in which case the necessary affirmative vote shall be 2/3 of the senators present and voting. Crystal clear. The rules of the Senate are to be decided by 2/3, and to bring to a close debate upon any measure, motion, or matter pending before the Senate requires 3/5, 60 votes out of our 100. That's the rule of the Senate. That has guided us for generations, and it has worked well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I could go in even greater detail, to say that the process has been working very well. And the senators on the Republican side have treated very well the nominees of President Obama, far better than were the nominations of President Bush when I came here in 2000, when I was here in 2000. His nominees were hammered, filibustered for the first time in history, led by some of the same people that now with great outrage attack those who have blocked and filibustered a few of the Obama nominees, just a few. So it's really almost unbelievable to me that we're at this point of the rule processes of the United States Senate. So how did it happen? Precisely what happened? I think the American people need to know. So Senator Reid apparently irritated that he was not being able to have confirmed 3 judges to the District of Columbia Circuit Bench, decided that he was going to change the rules. Senator Schumer said we were going to get these nominees confirmed one way or the other. Now, I'm a ranking Republican on the Budget Committee. This country is spending money it does not have on things it does not need on an absolute regular basis. We are wasting taxpayers' money. And so the action of the President and the Senate majority to fill 3 seats on the District of Columbia Court of Appeals was scrutinized. And in my opinion, I believe it's incontestable that these positions did not need to be filled. They just didn't. They don't have enough work on that court to need these judges. The average caseload per judge on the D.C. Circuit was 149 per judge. 149. Well, what does that mean? Is that a lot or not a lot? It's not a lot. It's the lowest number by far of any circuit in America, and the caseload has been steadily declining. I have been chairman in the Judiciary Committee of the Court Subcommittee that deals with these issues. Senator Grassley was before I became. I have been ranking member and now ranking member on that committee, the Court Subcommittee. We've been watching the D.C. Circuit. The cases continue to decline. So with 8 judges now active on that court, they're now down to 149 cases per judge. Well, is that a lot? How about my circuit, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals that sits in Atlanta, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia? How many cases do they have per judge? Hold your hat. 740. That's how many my court handles per judge. And they say they don't need more judges. In fact, they prefer not to have the court get so large that they can't be a coherent court and be able to have consistency in the law. And that's been their position for many years, more than 20 years. They don't want more judges. And actually, we know that the judges on the D.C. Circuit have said they don't need more judges. We know they took off last summer, and they take off long summers, unlike any other court of appeals, from May 16th to September 16th. They didn't hold court from May 16th to September 16th. The next lowest circuit in America has almost twice as many cases per judge as the D.C. Circuit. And I know our frugal presiding officer as governor of Maine didn't part of that Yankee frugality that they're famous for, knew how to manage his money when he was governor, and it cost $1 million a year, we're told, to maintain a federal judgeship. That's a lot of money. So we're adding 3 judges to the D.C. Court of Appeals that absolutely are not needed. Absolutely are not needed. And this Senate refused to confirm them. We voted not to confirm these judges and blocked moving to a final vote, and they lacked the 3/5 vote to confirm those judges. But Senator Schumer said, we're going to get them done one way or the other. We don't worry about principle. We don't worry about law. We don't worry about the heritage of the Senate. We don't worry about whether we need those judges or not. We're going to put them in anyway. Well, I didn't pay much attention to that. I didn't think he was serious about that. I got to tell you. I thought that we could perfectly, our Democratic colleagues would really understand that we've confirmed almost all the president's nominees. Only 2 or 3 prior to that had been failed out of the whole 6 years he's been in office. President Bush lost 5 on one day. Good nominees, for no other reason that they have a classical view of restraint on the part of a judge. So I didn't think that, and we don't need these judges. Matter of fact, Senator Grassley and I actually offered and passed legislation that moved one of the D.C. circuits to the 9th Circuit Court of Appeal in California, a liberal circuit. But that circuit wanted more judges and appeared to need more judges to handle the caseload. And we moved one. And we've got legislation to move others to some place in America where it's needed, because we're going to have to fill and add some judgeships around the country, because unlike the D.C. Circuit, some of the areas in our country are adding cases in needing judges and are short of judges. So good management simply says you take them from where you don't need them and you move them to places where you do need them, and you serve the taxpayers' interest of America, and you protect the money they send to us. And we have a holy charge to protect every single dollar extracted from every American. And a former speaker, a Democratic leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, said, "We've cut all we can cut. We can't find any more waste in our government. There's nothing left to cut." Well, there are places left to cut. These three judges on the D.C. Circuit are just one of thousands, tens of thousands of places we could save money in America that we're spending, that we don't need to be spending, that do not help America, do not make us stronger, and do not benefit the rule of law. So how did it happen? What happened that so upset the Senate? Senator Reid, the majority leader, is one of 100. Let me just say that. He puts his britches on one leg at a time. He does not get to dictate this Senate. He gets to stand right there, and because his presiding officer is selected by Senator Reid, he's the majority leader. The presiding officer will always recognize him first. It's done when Republicans have the majority. It's done when Democrats have the majority. So he asked for recognition and got it. And this is how he changed the rules of the Senate that require a 3/5 vote to shut off debate. And to change the rules of the Senate, remember, is supposed to take a 2/3 vote, 67 votes. He said to the presiding officer at that point, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Patrick Leahy, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, a man who's most experienced in all of these matters. And this is what Senator Reid said. It really makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I talked to a reporter, experienced, well-known reporter the other day, and he was talking about it. He said he didn't ask for confidentiality. He probably used my name. But anyway, he said, I didn't think he was going to do it. And when it started, everybody in the newsroom just stopped, and we looked. Why? Because this was a big deal. This was a huge event in the history of the United States Senate. And this is what Senator Reid said, and everybody needs to know how it happened. He said, I raise a point of order that the vote on the cloture under the Rule 22 for all nominations other than for the Supreme Court of the United States is by majority vote. The vote on cloture, to shut off debate, he moved that under Rule 22, he said under Rule 22 that the vote on cloture to shut off debate for all nominations other than Supreme Court, just he thought that up, I suppose, is by majority vote. But look, this is what Rule 22 says. A motion signed by 16 senators to bring to a closed debate on any measure, motion, or other matter pending before the Senate shall be decided by 3/5 of the senators duly sworn. So the majority leader of the United States Senate, knowing precisely what Rule 22 said, stood right there and asked the chairman, the presiding officer, to pretend that this is not a rule of the Senate and that only a majority vote is needed. That's what he said. And what did Senator Leahy say? The president, this is what the transcript shows. Senator Leahy is the president pro tempore of the United States Senate, and he says this: under the rules, the point of order is not sustained. Exactly right. Senator Reid's petition that it ought to be decided by a majority vote couldn't be sustained because it's absolutely in violation of the rule of the Senate. And Senator Leahy so ruled, as he was advised, I'm sure, by the parliamentarian, also selected by Senator Reid. There's no question about this. There's absolutely no question about it. But there's this little deal, that on a matter where parliamentarian rules on matters dealing with the rules of the Senate, somebody can ask that and appeal the ruling of the Senate, and appeal to the whole Senate to decide whether or not the parliamentarian is correct. So they use this corrective measure to allow the will of the Senate to interpret rules of the Senate, to break the rules of the Senate. And so that's what they did. Lemming like my Democratic colleagues, surely not fully understanding the gravity of what they did, one by one walked up and voted from their chair in support of Senator Reid. And all but two of the Democratic colleagues voted, over 50, a majority voted, to say that the rules of the U.S. Senate don't mean what they say and that we'll just ignore them. And I'll tell you something else they ignored. And so the net effect was that once that was ruled, then the idea that a motion for judges would have to, cloture could be shut off, debate could be shut off with a simple majority. And that became the rule of the Senate, in a way contrary to the rules of the Senate, which said that to change except to amend the Senate rules, in which case the necessary affirmative vote shall be 2/3. To change that rule of the Senate that says it takes 60 votes to shut off debate to a majority to shut off debate would take 2/3. So they just ignored that. And the reason that's so important is every other rule, tradition, or standard of the Senate is now at stake. Very, very, very wise senator, Carl Levin from Michigan, longtime Democrat, chairman of the Armed Services Committee on which I sit. And I've watched him work for all the years I've been in the Senate, and I've been very, very impressed. He and I don't agree on many of the substantive issues and how we approach spending and taxes and regulation, but he knows how to preside in a committee to give everybody a fair shake. And he said we shouldn't do this. He pleaded with his Democratic colleagues not to vote in this fashion. He said that if you can change a rule in this fashion, if you can alter the rules of the Senate this way, there are no rules. There is no power, no protection for the minority other than the simple power of the majority vote. There is nothing in this Senate, if we follow this precedent, that can't be changed by a simple appeal to the ruling of the chair and altering those rights that have always protected the minority. That's a very, very dangerous thing. It was played with and talked about by the Republicans on one occasion when the entire ground rules of the Senate for confirmation of judges was altered, and we found ourselves with a stunning filibuster of 10 of the first 12 nominees President Bush submitted for the Court of Appeals, but it was never executed. An agreement was reached to alter that. And indeed, when this tension rose at the beginning of this year, Senator Reid agreed to changes in the process that gave the majority party and the President more power to expedite nominees and gave them more power over the minority. And he was able to secure that agreement in a way consistent with the heritage of the Senate. And he said at that time he was not going to seek to change the rules of the Senate again. So I just want to say, this should not be looked at as a little matter. It's a very big matter, and I'm extraordinarily troubled by it. And that's part of what's happening now. So we're just not in a here. Now, I want to mention one more thing on the chart I have that talks about the caseload for the D.C. Circuit. Look at these numbers. This is the 11th Circuit. It's 720 cases per judge, not 740 as I said earlier. And look at these caseloads per judge till you get down here to the D.C. Circuit at 149 per judge. We didn't need to add 3 judges. The existing active judges, not counting the vacancies, just the 8 active judges, only have 149 cases per judge. We don't need to add 1 new judge. And the President was determined to try to shove that through, and that he did, and got us into all this turmoil when the Senate didn't agree. 3/5 of the senators not agreeing to move forward to a final vote, resulting in the lack of confirmation of those judges. And that's where we are. The 5th Circuit in Texas out in 488 cases per judge. The 9th Circuit in California, 472 cases per judge. The 2nd Circuit handling some of the more complex cases in America, Manhattan and New York, 440 cases per judge. And you see the caseload averages around the country. The average is 384 cases per judge. That's about 2.5 times the number of cases that the D.C. Circuit has per cases. So that's why the objections were made to the nominees. I said when this happened, most of these nominees, they would probably be confirmed, that the nominees would probably be confirmed because if it hadn't been for the low caseload, that there was not a question. I suggested, without going into detail, I suggested that the nominees were probably qualified, and it would be unlikely that they would be filibustered because of lack of qualifications, although I was probably wrong in that. At least one of them, Pillard's nomination, really is represents a judge whose views on the law are so outside the mainstream that I don't believe, having studied that record subsequent to those remarks, that she should have been confirmed on the merits. But my basic view from the beginning, as I stated from the very beginning, it's not a question of the merits of the nominees. The question was, do we need to spend $1 million, $3 million a year for these 3 judges when we've got other circuits that need judges and they don't need them here? But I would just share with you what President Obama was looking for in his nominees. Ms. Pillard went to Yale and Harvard. She's also spent 6 years with the American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She's a longtime member of the very liberal activist American Constitution Society that believes in activist judges and advocates for that. In recent years, an activist conservative legal movement has, and there she has been a professor at Georgetown. She's written many controversial articles and has a record exclusively devoted, it seems to me, to a very extreme progressive judicial philosophy. that says that judges do not need to be objective and are empowered to redefine the meaning of the words in the Constitution to advance an agenda, and seems to be in harmony with President Obama's openly stated view about what he looks for in judges, and that is a judge who's empathetic. He's got empathy. Well, what does that mean, empathy? What it means is he wants a judge not committed to law. That's what it means. What is empathy? Feelings, ideology, politics? That's what it sounds like to me. The American heritage of lit law is based on objective criteria, the rule of law. Judges take an oath to serve under the Constitution of the United States and the laws of America. They are under them. They serve the law. They don't write the law. They don't amend the law. They don't change the law. They don't change the meaning of words in our laws or our Constitution to meet some empathetic feeling they have, some political agenda they have. And the American people are on to it. They know this is happening too much. They do not like it. They want it to stop. And they don't want this kind of judge on the bench. But many of our great law schools, many of our judicial philosophers and writers think this is all great. They think we need this kind of thing. We need to advance the law. That's what they say. And the hero to them is the one who comes up with some gimmick to reinterpret plain meanings of our Constitution to have it say what they want it to say at a given time, to help the side in the lawsuit they'd like to see helped to advance an agenda. It's really part of a postmodern approach to life, to law, and Senator Reid's nuclear option execution is also a postmodern power thing. It's the results, it's the ends, it's the ideology, it's the revolution. Advance the cause. No rules apply. You say, Jeff, you're too hard. You shouldn't say that. That's exactly what it is I have to say in my belief. Remember, in 2001, when President Bush got elected, the Democrats, there were virtually no filibusters. A few judges had problems. They were held up for a while, but there were no filibusters of judges. They met in retreat. Lawrence Tribe, Marsha Greenberger, Cass Sunstein was there, according to the New York Times, and they came out of the retreat with a decision. And the decision was to alter the ground rules of confirmations. And they immediately accepted the two nominees President Bush had submitted that were Democrats. One of them hadn't been confirmed under President Clinton. He renominated him. They took those two and confirmed them. They blocked 10 great judges, great nominees. And this went on for over a year. There were votes after votes after votes, and they steadfastly, Senator Schumer, the leader, blocked those judges from being voted on by a filibuster because there weren't 60 votes to shut off debate, to effect cloture. And so this went on to extraordinary time. And at some point, the threat was that the nuclear option would be executed, and a group of senators met and said, look, let's don't change the rules of the Senate by breaking the rules of the Senate. Let's reach an agreement. And this is what they said. They said you shouldn't filibuster judges anymore unless there are extraordinary circumstances to justify it. Normally, you should just vote yes or no for the judge. And in most cases, yes or no should be the vote. And filibusters, serious filibusters of nominees should not occur. except for extraordinary circumstances. Well, I thought that was okay. I didn't really think we should filibuster, period. But it seemed to be a reasonable compromise in a political body that would do the right thing for the confirmation process. And we've been operating under that since 2002, I guess it was, that agreement was reached. And I thought it was pretty good, actually. I was sort of proud the way that came out. And therefore, President Obama's had very few filibusters. But when this gang of 14 reached their agreement and it sort of was adopted by the Senate, there were 10 judges being filibustered out of the first batch of judges President Bush nominated. And what came out of it was 5 were confirmed and 5 failed. So on one day, 5 judges were defeated without, in my opinion, anything like a justifiable basis to defeat those judges. But that's the way it was. We agreed to it. 5 judges were blocked and never got to serve. 5 more were confirmed. So when I see the crocodile, and who orchestrated that was Senator Reid. He complained mightily, would anybody even think about ending the right to filibuster a judge? And Senator Schumer, he was leading the filibusters. So when the 3 judges that were nominated for absolutely unneeded seats on the D.C. circuit were blocked, you would have thought this was the first time in history anybody had ever been blocked from being a judge in this Senate. And they went and changed the whole rules of the Senate. It's just unbelievable to me that we're at this point. I believe truly that President Obama's nominees were treated fairly. I believe they've been evaluated fairly, and only a very few have been blocked. On one day, Senator Reid filed cloture on 17 nominations. It was totally set up. And you know what he said it was? He said that we were filibustering these. Every time he filed cloture, he said a filibuster was occurring. Well, none of these judges were blocked. All of these judges got confirmed. There was not even a vote on cloture for the 17. Yet, when he claims there's some unprecedented number of filibusters in the Senate, he's counting that. There's not been this. Well, so this is part of the tension that we're involved with. And we remember, brooding over all of this is the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and how that legislation was opposed by a substantial majority of Americans consistently, 2-to-1, virtually 2-to-1 consistently. The American people rejected Obamacare. They told this Congress not to pass it. We did everything we could on the Republican side to keep it from passing. We pleaded with our colleagues not to do this, but oh no, they had to pass it. President Obama wanted it, and they were going to pass it, and we would find out later what's in it. That was literally the gist of what happened. And Senator Scott Brown from Massachusetts, liberal Massachusetts, home of Ted Kennedy, who believed in government involvement in health care, he was elected on a promise in Massachusetts to be the vote to kill it. It was a vacancy. Senator Kennedy's death had created this vacancy. And he campaigned to kill and be deny the Democrats the 60th vote necessary. So what did they do? They used the reconciliation budget process to pass this monumental policy change in America before, in a way that kept Scott Brown and the American people through the electoral process from ending this piece of legislation that put us in the position we're in today, where you don't get to keep your doctor, you don't get to keep your health care, where people's deductibles are going through the roof, where the price of their insurance is going up, where people are not being hired, where two-thirds of the people who get a job this year in America only got a part-time job, clearly being driven by business interest and trying to avoid being caught up in the obligations of the Affordable Care Act. But they insisted, and Senator Reid has used every parliamentary maneuver possible to block any votes that would actually fix this bill or alter it in any way. So I just got to say, we're at a point where we've got to wonder about, is democracy happening in the Senate? So you go back home. People get elected to the United States Senate. They campaign, they say they want to go up there, and they want to change Obamacare. Have we had a single vote this year to change Obamacare? No, because Senator Reid knows how to fill the tree and block any votes and keep it from happening. We're not voting on it. The House has repeatedly passed all kinds of legislation, sent it to the Senate, supposedly to cause us to respond to it, review the legislation, have votes, have amendments, and see what kind of response we'd have to fixing the problems with Obamacare. What happens? Senator Reid obstructs that process. He does not allow these votes to occur. They might as well have thrown their legislation down the well. The House, what good is to send a bill to the Senate if it never gets brought up on the most important issue facing our country today? Health care, we can't even have a debate about it or vote about it? Is this the great Senate that Robert Byrd referred to? And what about the defense bill? The defense bill's over here now. Spends over $500 billion. Over about half of the discretionary spending of the United States Congress that we spend. What are we told? We're told the Senate's too busy. We can't bring up the defense bill and have an amendment. No more amendments. The two little amendments that were held, that were voted on in an entire week are all you're going to get. No more amendments will be accepted. We're going to pass the bill as it is or vote no on it. Why? Why? Because Senator Reid knows that there are some very important issues involved in the defense bill, and they're controversial, and people have different views about them. And some people on his side of the aisle don't want to vote on those bills because they have to stand up before their constituents and before America and before the world and actually cast a vote and be accountable for their tenure in the United States Senate. And so members of this side, like Senator Tom Coburn, he's got ideas to fix the Defense Department, to save money. And Senator Reid won't give him a vote on it. And he objects. And Senator Reid says, Senator Coburn, you're obstructing. You're one of those Republican obstructionists. You don't get a vote, Senator Coburn. I decide who votes here. I've filled the tree. I know how to fill the tree. I'm the majority leader. And you get a vote, you have to ask me. And I'm not giving you any more votes. I've had enough of you guys. That's kind of the way it's been. It's the way it's been with Obamacare, and it's been with the defense vote. The very idea that the national security is at stake, and we have a $500 billion defense bill. And I'm on the Armed Services Committee. we tried to work together. We basically had a almost unanimous vote on it. Last year we had a unanimous vote on the defense bill. But there's still matters that we carried to the floor with a full understanding there would be debates and votes on those disputed issues. And the whole Senate would get to vote on them. They're not being allowed to vote on those. This is unusual, colleagues. This has never happened in the history of the Senate. They've studied and found that in the last 28 years, previous to Senator Reid, the tactic of filling the tree to limit debate was done 40 times. Since Senator Reid has been majority leader, he's done it 77 times. It's every time, really. He is in complete control of the amendment process in the Senate. And we had a Democratic colleague said, well, he thought that he had to get approval of the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, before he could get his vote up. Why? Well, Senator Reid says Republicans filed 20 amendments. Senator Reid says you can only have 3. And so he talks with Senator McConnell. McConnell says, that's not enough, Senator Reid. Well, you can get 5, but I want to approve them. And I suppose Senator McConnell may say, well, how many of you want to have, and I want to know what they are before I reach an agreement with you. So I suspect it may be true that we've got Democratic senators having to ask the minority leader of the U.S. Senate for approval to get their amendment up. That is not the way this should operate. It has never operated that way. Our history is open and free debate, unlimited debate, in which the great issues of our time can be discussed here and actually voted on. And our constituents back home, if they don't like the way we are voting, can vote us out of office and send somebody else up here. So politics is driving this. There's no other reason. And the contention is that there wasn't enough time to vote on the defense bill. But the defense bill was on the floor an entire week. We could have had 10 votes a day, 15 votes a day, easy on the defense bill. Senator Inhofe, the ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee, told Senator Reid that he had limited the number of amendments that senators on our side had to 25. And we could do those, could have been done easily in a week. But what was also true, as Senator Inhofe noted, that a lot of those votes would never occur actually, because somehow the person would realize he didn't have the votes to pass, or that the manager of the bill would agree to some of the amendments, or some other thing would happen. So very unlikely that many votes would be cast. But that's what we've done in the past. We've had 2 and 3 weeks of time spent on the defense bill. And we've had multiple amendments, 30, 40, 50 amendments. And that's just ended. So here we are, at a time when the country has a crisis on its hands. The American people are suffering by a massive takeover of health care that was rammed through this body against their will, and they still remain steadfastly opposed to it. And those of us who share those same concerns, and that we want to change and alter this bill that's damaging our economy, that's damaging health care, that's hammering the middle class, we can't even get votes on it because we have a leader who's dictating how things are done here. This has got to end. It's just got to end. It cannot continue. And I don't see how any member of this body can go back home if you're a Democrat, and say, I couldn't get an amendment up. Why? Well, Senator McConnell wouldn't let me. And I go back home to my state, others go back home to their state. Senator Toomey goes back in Pennsylvania, says, I offered all these amendments to improve Obamacare. And his constituent says, well, did you vote on it? No. Why not? Senator Reid wouldn't let me. Now, where did this become part of the history of our country? Is this what we teach our children in grade school? The way democracy is supposed to work? No. And it's got to end. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to share these remarks tonight. We're at a point in our history that this Senate has got to stand up, reverse the trends that have been going on, and to ensure that we operate in an open way, that people have to vote and vote and vote, and they can be held accountable for the people who sent us here. And when we make people mad, they have every right to vote us out of office. We don't have any right to come here and hide under our desk, not to expose ourselves, not to let people know how we really feel and how we really been moving the country. So I think the Tea Party rightly has concerns about that kind of thing. And I hope that we can make progress to improve this situation. It's essential for our country. I would yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise as we consider the nomination of Deborah Lee James as Secretary of the Air Force. But I want to touch on some of the points that were made by the gentleman, the senator from Alabama, and I want to state how much I appreciate his leadership, especially as a ranking member of the Budget Committee, his consistent leadership in fighting for fiscal discipline and putting our country back on a sustainable fiscal path, his commitment to an open amendment process, the opportunity to have a vigorous debate in the Senate so that this body can work its will, and of course his work on the Armed Services Committee. I appreciate all of that. Appreciate him being here tonight. I do think it's important that we have a discussion about how we got here, Mr. President, a discussion about the circumstances that have led to this completely unprecedented moment in the entire history of the Republic. We have never found ourselves in a circumstance where a majority party has decided that they alone should have sole say in who shall be appointed to the executive branch and who shall have the lifetime appointments to our federal bench. I am one who believes that this will very likely have very detrimental effects, because when one party can ram through their choice without having to give any regard whatsoever to what the other party thinks, then what do we get? Well, we get legislation like Obamacare, and we have extremes in the nominations who will eventually be confirmed. Any president comes under pressure from the extremes within his or her party to put the most extreme people in positions of power. And the Senate has played a vital role in moderating that extreme, that tendency, that pressure, because it's always been the case, virtually always, that neither party has 60 votes. Very seldom has it been the case that a party's had over 60 votes, and so it has always been necessary, usually, almost always been necessary, that there be some broad bipartisan consensus on the people who will populate powerful posts as regulators and lifetime appointments to the bench. That's no longer the case now. There is no such check. And I fear the consequences will be very detrimental. Extremism in the regulatory agencies, volatility as we move from one administration to another and we have these swings, and a real danger, and probably the most disturbing thing of all, is the real danger that one of the sources, the greatest sources of pride that Americans can have in their federal government, which has been an independent, nonpartisan judiciary, that very judiciary becomes a partisan, becomes a creature of the political, and becomes captured by the political branches of government. That's the danger, and that's why I think it's important that we consider how we got here and why we got here. It's particularly extraordinary when you consider the statements of some of the leaders on the other side of the aisle, the Democratic leaders who for years were passionately opposed to doing exactly what they did last month. The Majority Leader himself, just a short time ago, he said, and I will quote, Senator Reid said, quote, "The right to extend the debate is never more important than when one party controls Congress and the White House. In these cases, a filibuster serves as a check on power and preserves our limited government," end quote. Senator Schumer, senior senator from New York, he put it this way, and I quote, he said, "The checks and balances which have been at the core of this republic will be evaporated by the nuclear option. The checks and balances say that if you get 51% of the vote, you don't get your way 100% of the time." That was Senator Schumer, Senator Reid, and there are many other quotes on the record in which they vigorously opposed the notion of denying the minority any say in confirmation process when it was discussed but never implemented some years ago. So why would they have such a 180-degree reversal? Why would their opinion and that of the vast majority of my Democratic colleagues, why would it have changed to the point where they would actually take this absolutely unprecedented step? Well, Senator Reid gave an explanation on the day that he inflicted these changes on this body. And I'll quote from Senator Reid's explanation. What he said was, quote, "There has been unbelievable, unprecedented obstruction. For the first time in the history of our republic, Republicans have routinely used the filibuster to prevent President Obama from appointing his executive team or confirming judges." That's what Senator Reid said. So it's been about Republicans obstructing the president from appointing his executive team and confirming judges. Well, let's just consider the case of judges to start with. Let's take a look at this chart, because since President Obama has been president, some very simple, very easily verifiable facts that we can look at. The President has sent nominees for the Senate to consider. Since he became president, the Senate has confirmed 215 of those nominees. But the Senate has blocked 2 of his nominees. These are verifiable facts. They're not in dispute. These are the numbers. In total, the President has sent us the names of 217 candidates for judgeships. 215 were confirmed and are sitting judges. 2 were blocked. Now, there's another category of nominees, and that's the executive branch nominees, the various agencies and regulatory bodies which are subject to senatorial confirmation. The President has sent us a total of 1,494 non-judicial executive branch nominees. The Senate has confirmed 1,492, and the Senate has blocked 2. So in total, the math's not that complicated. The total is that the President has nominated and sent to the United States Senate for our consideration a total of 1,711 altogether, and the Senate has confirmed 1,707. The Senate has blocked 4. So if you do the math, that's a confirmation rate of 99.8%. So of all the nominees that the President has sent to this body to be confirmed, we haven't actually confirmed every one. We've only confirmed 99.8% of them. Of the 1,711, we've blocked 4. Now, Mr. President, I would suggest that the power of advice and consent, the Constitution says advice and consent. It doesn't just say advice. If it just said advice, then that would clearly imply that the President could ignore the advice if he chose. But it doesn't say just advise. It says advice and consent. Well, the power to consent clearly and obviously implies that under some circumstances that consent would be withheld. If not, there's no meaning to this at all. So I would suggest, Mr. President, that it is patently absurd to suggest that a 99.8% confirmation rate is a pattern of obstruction, as we've been accused of. So that can't be the real reason, obviously. Obviously, this kind of record of almost universally approving presidential nominees can't possibly be the real reason that we had this unprecedented power grab and rules change. So what was the real purpose? What was the real motivation behind this very dramatic development? I'm here to tell you, I think it's very clear what the real motivation was. The motivation was to pack the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals so that a partisan group of judges would validate an agenda that this administration and many of our friends on the other side of the aisle want to impose. Now, that's an outrageous thing to say in some ways. Some people might think, well, that's quite an accusation. What would be my basis for saying a thing like that? Well, it would be the fact that Senator Reid and Senator Schumer told us that that was their reason. They've said so. Well, I'll get to their quote, but let me explain why this has been done. See, the fact is, elections have consequences. The President of the United States was elected. The Republicans have been enormously deferential in confirming his nominees, among other things. But you know, in 2012, the President wasn't the only person on the ballot. The entire House of Representatives was on the ballot, and the American people chose to re-elect a Republican majority in the House of Representatives. Those elections have consequences as well. And one of the consequences of that election, the set of elections that produced a Republican majority in the House and left many Republicans in the Senate, one of the consequences is that the President's, the more liberal aspects of the President's agenda just cannot pass in Congress. They're not supported by a majority of the American people. They're not supported by majorities in Congress. Things like cap and trade and card check and the war on coal, recess appointments, these things don't have support. They don't have broad support. And I don't think in either body, certainly not enough in the House of Representatives to pass. So what is a president to do if he can't get his legislation passed, but he nevertheless wants to pursue an agenda? Well, one way a president could choose to do this, especially one who is not interested in working with the minority party, and let's face it, Obamacare is the clear example that this president is not interested in the input of Republicans. That was jammed through without a single Republican vote in either the House or the Senate. There was no input from Republicans. There was no consideration for what the minority party considered, and there was not a broad consensus. So it's not surprising that a very short time later, there's a big majority of the American people don't support this bill, because it was never designed with enough input and enough buy-in to have that broad consensus. So if a president is not interested in working with the minority party and he can't get his legislation through because there aren't enough members of his party in Congress, well, the alternative is to try to impose it through the regulatory, through the agencies, through the regulators, through the executive branch, which has become enormous and enormously powerful. Now, there's only one big hurdle for a president who tries to go down this road. And that hurdle is that eventually, people who are the victims of an overreaching group of regulators and administrators and, and agency heads, they have recourse. If they think that a given regulator is acting unfairly or illegally or unconstitutionally, they can go to court. And in fact, people do that. And guess what court ends up hearing the appeals and making what is very typically the final decisions as a practical matter regarding federal regulations? Why, it's the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the way our federal system works. And in fact, the D.C. Circuit Court has generally been upholding the laws. I believe that the evidence is very clear that it is a capable, competent, nonpartisan group of talented judges who make decisions as they see fit. They call balls and strikes, as referees ought to. And among their decisions, for instance, I'm sure I don't agree with all of them, but they did block what I thought was an illegal overreach by the EPA, inconsistent with the laws regulating the EPA. They didn't believe that the President had the right to decide when Congress was in recess and make appointments that suited him when we were not able to deny consent. That was the D.C. Circuit Court's decision. And this, and several others, was completely unacceptable to some of my Democratic friends. It's unacceptable that an independent, nonpartisan court might reach decisions that are inconsistent with the liberal agenda. Now, how do we know that this was unacceptable? Well, we've got some quotes. Just 1 second on that chart. The senior senator from New York, Senator Schumer, discussed this. He was speaking to a group of supporters, it's on the record, and he complained that the D.C. Circuit, quote, overturned the EPA's ability to regulate existing coal plants. Okay. He complained that the SEC can't pass rules unless they do what is called a cost-benefit analysis. Okay. He complained that they struck down the administration's illegal recess appointments to the NLRB. And he told a group of supporters, and here's the quote, that Democrats will, quote, will fill up the D.C. Circuit one way or another. That was the quote. It's pretty straightforward. I'll give them that. It's pretty candid. We don't like the decisions that is coming out of this court, so we'll pack the court with people who agree with our ideology. Senator Schumer wasn't the only one to make this case. Senator Reid had this to say of the D.C. Circuit, and I quote, "They're the ones that said the president can't have recess appointments. They've done a lot of bad things. So we're focusing very intently on the D.C. Circuit. We need at least one more. There's 3 vacancies. We need at least one more, and that will switch the majority." We'll put that up. This is Senator Reid on the D.C. Circuit. We need at least one more, obviously referring to judges. We need at least one more, and that will switch the majority. So I think it's pretty clear what was going on here. So now, fast forward to a few weeks ago, well, there was just one obstacle to putting the people that would agree with Senator Schumer and Senator Reid on the D.C. Circuit Court and render the decisions that they wanted, and the obstacle was Republicans weren't interested in going along with the scheme to pack the court for ideological purposes. We didn't really think that was a very good idea. Thought it's probably better to have judges who are not there to try to advance a political agenda, but believe that their job is to apply the law as written and make sure that it's consistent with the Constitution, as opposed to pursuing a political agenda. So despite the fact that Republicans had, to that point, confirmed 99.8% of all the president's nominees, that was going a little bit too far, to simply blatantly pack the D.C. Circuit Court, and we said no to the 3 nominees who were people they were intending to pack that court. And when we did, Senator Reid, after publicly promising he was not going to change the rules this way just this past summer, nevertheless did exactly that. And despite the fact that Senate rules are very clear, to change the rules requires a vote of 67 senators precisely so that there would be a broad consensus behind the rules. Senator Reid changed the rules with a mere 51 votes. He broke the rules so that he could change the rules so that the Democratic majority can now steamroll through and rubber stamp all of the president's nominees, including those necessary to pack the court so that they can pursue the agenda that they want to pursue. Again, this is not my speculation. These are the quotes from the man who helped to organize this effort. It is, frankly, very reminiscent in a lot of ways of Obamacare. Steamrolled through Congress, one party, no input from the other party, the minority party, and a complete disaster. And by the way, the other big similarity is the broken promises. Senator Reid clearly, unambiguously, unequivocally, unconditionally made the promise that he wasn't going to change the rules, and then he did. And then what have we been hearing about Obamacare? One broken promise after another. Mr. President, what I'm going to do for the remainder of the time that I consume this evening is remind all of us of some of the promises that were made, and then I'm just going to read a small sample of the emails that have been coming into my office from Pennsylvanians who have learned firsthand the hard way, the painful way, just how untrue these promises were. And the first one is maybe the most famous of the promises, and this is the President's repeated promise, echoed by many others, and I will quote, "If you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan." I don't know how many times the President said it, but we've all seen it. We all know it. But what's particularly maddening is we also know something else. We know that everybody who said this always knew that this was not true. It was not true because the design of the bill forbid people from keeping health insurance plans in many cases. Not all cases, but many cases. And the authors of the bill and the supporters of the bill and the people who voted for the bill knew fully well that one of the purposes of the bill was to establish government-approved standards for all insurance plans. And if your plan did not meet those standards, you were going to lose your plan. So this is what some folks have written to us about this promise, that if you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. This was just 2 days ago. A gentleman from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, wrote, "As my congressional representative, you need to know how Obamacare is harming my life and health care. I work for a small construction company. My cost for family health care was already over $11,000 per year. We received notification that our policy was being canceled since it did not comply with the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. Our company looked for the best rates they could find for comparable coverage, which did comply. They chose a new insurance company. We just recently were given the costs for next year. The cost to cover myself and my family will be over $17,500 per year, a 59% increase. Even with that, the deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums are higher. This is not affordable care. This would eat up a major part of my income. I attempted to log on to the healthcare.gov website several times, but always get kicked out. I do not hold up much hope that I'll get any better rates because I do not qualify for a credit. We were already struggling to live on my take-home pay. We cannot afford to have it reduced by over $6,500. We may have to drop health coverage for my wife or kids and pay the penalty. I suspect that this law will result in many more people losing their health care at the expense of a few getting free or reduced cost health care." I got another email, this time from a gentleman from Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. This was last week. He writes, "My wife Barb and I have been trying for almost 3 weeks now to get signed up. All income and health info and private information is on the unsecured website and the application is accepted, but we've not been able to get on to pick the plan or get our price. So nobody's been paid. Thus, our canceled insurance ends on December 31st, and we look to be out. A big mistake by the folks that voted for this. I've had cancer a couple of times. My wife has had cancer, and we both see our doctors when needed. This ACA will ruin many families if we can't get onto an insurance plan." So these folks are not only losing the insurance that they had, but they haven't been able to get an alternative plan. A woman from Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, last week, she sent me this email. "We had our health care discontinued, and after an appeal, we're able to get it reinstated, but only for this year. Currently, we have a health care savings plan with a deductible of $3,000 a year. In the new plan, our deductible would increase to $12,000, and our premiums would increase to $9,000 a year. How is a middle-class married family supposed to pay for that? This is absolutely ridiculous, and this is our situation. I hope every government worker has to purchase their plan through this plan." It's a gentleman from Delaware County sent me this email last week. I'm 66 and I'm on Medicare. My wife, Mary Ann, is 63. Her insurance company canceled her long-standing policy due to the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. Her new policy costs $350 more per month. We're on a strict budget. We're the hard-working middle class. Who stands for us? Small business owner from Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, December 3rd. I'm a small business owner with 3 employees looking for health insurance. My old policy is being canceled, and I was offered a replacement policy which is 68% higher than the old policy with higher deductibles. I went through the healthcare.gov site and was quoted an individual policy for my family which is 74% higher with higher deductibles. When do I see affordable health care for my family? I've been self-employed for 19 years and have paid for my insurance all these years myself. With the deductibles, I'm looking at $26,000 out of pocket for health insurance this year. Please help. Another promise that we heard, so these were people, real people, who were demonstrating how untrue was the promise that you could keep the health insurance plan that you had. But there's another promise that we heard frequently, and that promise was, if you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor, period. The President added that flourish in the end, the period, just to emphasize. These are the President's words. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor, period. This was also something that everybody who had anything to do with this bill knew was going to be untrue. Insurance plans differ. Some cover certain doctors, others cover other doctors, and since some plans were certainly going to be canceled, inevitably some people were going to lose the plans that covered their doctor. This was no great mystery, and it was not some unintended, unforeseeable consequence. It was part of the design of the bill. And yet people were told, if you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor. Well, I got this email from a woman from Westmoreland County. She says, I've been self-employed for 13 years and have never been without health insurance. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Having an expensive pre-existing condition was not a problem for me, as I had never let my insurance lapse. My medication costs without insurance, $4,000 per month. I received notice several weeks ago that they were now going to cancel my plan, and were doing so as of January 1, and I had to sign up for new coverage through the health insurance exchange. Well, my staff reached out to this woman to see if we could help. Turns out, where she lived, and given her circumstances, there were 2 options that were available to her, 2 different plans. One plan covered her doctors. The other plan covered the medicine that she needed to treat her multiple sclerosis. Neither plan would do both. Now, what kind of a choice is that this woman's going to have to make? I had another email that arrived last week. I finally got to where I could compare plans on the government website, only to find that my insurance premiums would go from $512 per month for a plan with a $500 deductible, $2,500 out-of-pocket plan, to $799 for a plan with a $500 deductible and a $2,700 out-of-pocket expense. Where is the savings? None of these plans include my current doctor, whom I want to desperately keep. Obamacare is such a disaster. Please stand firm and continue to work toward repealing it. And finally, there's one more promise, false promise, that I'm going to give you some examples of responses I've gotten. And that's the promise that premiums for a family would decrease by $2,500 per year. In fact, the data that I've seen suggests that on average, premiums in the individual market have been increasing. But consider the case of some of the people who've reached out to my office from Pennsylvania. Here's a small business owner from Carbon County, Pennsylvania, last week. Sent me this email. It said, I've had an HSA high deductible plan for several years for my employees. I've paid 100% of the premiums and contributed 50% of the deductible every year that they pay the other 50%. I just received notice that my insurance premiums are going up 100%. What can be done to enforce the President's statements so we can keep our current plans? There's no way I can pay this new premium. My employees will be the ones hurt the most. They loved the coverage they had, and I hate that we can no longer provide this benefit. Here's an email I got from a father of two from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I received notice last week that my health care will more than triple. Currently, I'm paying $265 a month for me and my two young sons. My monthly premium will go up to $836 a month. The President promised you can keep your plan, and families will save $2,500 per year. I can keep my plan. I just can't afford it. I do qualify for subsidies, $80 a month. I got this email from a man from Mercer County, Pennsylvania, just 2 days ago. I just became another Obamacare victim. Because my employer's health plan costs are going up almost 100%, I'll have $400 less in my pocket each month. At 58, I'll have to cut way back on how much money I can put into my local economy. Obamacare needs to be scrapped. Here's an email from a man from Crawford County, Pennsylvania. I'm a small business owner, and I speak with many vendors in my field. One of said vendors says that his monthly costs would increase to $9 an hour on insurance alone. Another said he feared he would not even be able to stay in business because of the insurance costs. My own situation is just as dire. Currently, I personally pay about $1,500 a month for insurance, and under Obamacare, I've seen my costs go up by $375. On top of that, my wife, who's an insurance agent, fears that she will be losing her coverage next fall due to the law. Here's an email I got last week from a father from Luzerne County. Please keep fighting the disaster that is happening to the thousands of working men and women that will be losing their health care, along with some of us retired folks. Our son is one of them, and the alternative is unthinkable. His plan costs doubled to $300 a month, but the deductible is $4,500. Now, how can anyone say everyone will have affordable health care insurance on top of the statement no one will lose their plan or doctor if they're satisfied with them? Your fight is hard, but our prayers are with you. Here's an email that I got from a small business owner from Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. He writes, I'm a small business owner in the Carlisle area. We've been in business for 30 years. I offered insurance to the full-time employees for many years. If it weren't for the rising cost of health care, I could hire another employee because we could use the help. But with the anticipated increases, I won't be able to. I've been told by our insurance carrier that we can expect up to 50% increases. Finally, Mr. President, a small business owner from Chester County, Pennsylvania. He wrote last week, we just got our insurance coverage options for my small business. Previous rate was $470 per month with $0 deductible, a good plan. New plan is $692 per month with a $2,000 deductible, a bad plan. Okay, I cannot keep my plan. To get close to the one, I need to pay more and incur a ridiculous deductible. This is not free market. I don't like the government telling me what's best for me. I have several older employees, and their rates are up over $1,000 per month. I cannot afford to pay for their insurance, and they cannot afford to either. I'm forced to drop the plan or remove them from employment. This is out of control. So, Mr. President, this is just a really tiny sample. This is a small sample of the emails I've gotten. I'm just one senator from one state. Fact is, the vast majority of people who've experienced these problems, they don't ever send an email to their senator. So we've got this tiny little sliver of the thousands and hundreds of thousands, actually millions of Americans who are suffering from the direct consequences, and I would argue intended consequences of this bill. Unable to keep their health insurance plan, unable to keep their doctors, not experiencing savings, but rather experiencing increases in costs. These are just a few of the terrible consequences of Obamacare. There are many others I could cite, but I was just focusing on broken promises tonight. There's too many to list. But I do want to stress also that these are symptoms of a completely and impossibly flawed bill. The real underlying problem of Obamacare is something that Frederick Hayek warned us about. He called it the fatal conceit, right? This is the idea that a small group of really smart people can know more than the combined accumulated knowledge and wisdom that's dispersed across an entire population. It's an absurd notion, but yet it is at the heart of all kinds of big government plans, socialism everywhere, and it's clearly at the heart of Obamacare. The idea is that these mandarins, they're so smart, they know so much, that they should be able to force their will on everyone else. It's really, it's an extraordinarily insulting premise that this is based on, but it is. The premise is that individual men and women across America, they are certainly not qualified. They're certainly not smart enough to know what's good for them. They're certainly not, shouldn't be free to decide what kind of health plan they want to buy for their family. The trade-offs that you make when you buy something like a health insurance plan, like how important is a higher deductible versus lower premiums, or the importance of having maternity coverage, or the importance that someone might attach to a particular doctor, all of those judgments which are so personal are taken away from individuals in Obamacare. That's not for Americans to decide. You will take the plan that is available to you and approved by the government, period. Oh, and by the way, you're breaking the law if you don't, and you'll be assessed a fine. This is outrageous. This is not the society that we've always been. But it's really just the most recent and egregious example of this warning that Hayek gave us, this arrogance of big government. But, Mr. President, I would argue that it is an offensive affront to the freedom of the American people, and it is predictably and sensationally a failure. And I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.